Okay, here are the tools and supplies we'll need for this project. We have a knife with some sharp blades, we have our nippers, we have some sanding sticks of various grades, and some wet and dry sanding paper. We also have Tamiya extra thin cement and some acrylic paints and paintbrushes. Firstly, we need to examine the parts and remove any nubs. So I'm using a knife to do this. There's two ways to use the knife. You can use it as a blade, like I'm using it there, or you can use it as an adze, which is more like a scraper. I'll show you the scraper in more detail later on. We're just trying to get the parts nice and clean and ready for assembly. I've assembled the gun, and now I'm applying Tamiya extra thin cement. You only need a tiny amount, tiny amount. For what it's worth, the guns are almost the only part of a Gundam kit that I actually glue together. I don't think the rest of the kit really needs it, but guns do tend to have a bit of a seam line on them. Here I'm cleaning up the rocket nozzle, the vernier, and I'm using the knife as an adze. You can see I'm using the blade, scraping it rather than cutting with it. And that's great because the contour of the part helps you get the job done. Alright, now we've moved on to water slides. So killer tip, don't get your water slides wet until you're ready to use them. Here we have a water slide that I've cut out. I'm putting it in warm water and I'm going to let it soak for about 20 seconds. And the chocolate brown part is the part we're going to put the warning placard on. Got a nice big soft brush that I'm going to use to move the decal around. I like to use a brush to move decals around. I think it works better than tweezers. So the part's ready to, the decal rather is ready to go. Putting it onto the part. There it goes, coming off the backing paper. Now we need to move it into the final position. I'm using water. I'm just going to put a little bit of water down on the part and push it around with the brush. You can kind of refloat the decal if it's not in the right place. So you can see that's what I'm doing now. I'm going to put a little puddle down to refloat it and then push it around until I'm happy with the position. Now I'm dabbing that with a paper towel to set it. You can see we've got a pretty nice looking decal there. We didn't need any setting solution or anything because the plastic's smooth and it's a simple curve, so that the decal will just settle down, no problems at all. Okay, now let's paint the rocket exhaust. So I've put it in a holder. I'm shaking my paints. It's really important to shake your paints well. They don't work properly if they're not properly mixed up. Okay, so I'm putting some black paint out on a post-it and I'm going to water it down at least 50%. I want it to be really thin. These paints apply almost like a film, like it's a film that just goes over the surface that's mostly water, and the water's going to evaporate as the paint dries, so you don't get brush marks. So there's, if you thin them down, then the only thing that can leave brush marks is water. So I'm just pushing the paint around with the brush, letting capillary action be my friend and help me finish the job. And don't try to do it all in one coat. You can use 3 or 4 coats to get a nice solid layer of colour. Much better than trying to use one thick coat. And you can use the hairdryer between coats to accelerate the process. Just don't get the model parts too hot. Okay, now I've got some silver paint. It's a Games Workshop paint, but it mixes fine with all of the other similar acrylic paints. So I'm mixing black and silver together to get a dirty, dark steel colour. That's pretty much bolt gun metal if you're familiar with Games Workshop colours. And I'm going to paint the inside of the vernier with that colour. And again, I'm letting gravity do most of the work here. Really just letting the paint run in with gravity. So once that's dry, I'm going to paint the outside with bright silver. Again, I just took the silver paint, watered it down 50%, putting on several coats, using the hairdryer between coats. These paints dry really quickly. One thing you might want to look at in this video is how I hold my hands. I tend to have both hands on the desk. That reduces handshake, gives you a solid platform to work from. Okay, so now I'm happy with that. We're going to apply a little bit of weathering. So I'm going to mix up a dirty brown and we're going to do some dry brushing. So I'm just mixing some random shade of red with black to make a dirty brown. So just going for a sort of carbony kind of colour. Now because we're dry brushing, we're going to wipe nearly all of this paint off the brush. In fact, that's the most important tip about dry brushing, is you want to get that brush as dry as you can. So I'm going to test the brush on the paper towel, and then I'm going to test the brush on my palette, and then I'm going to test the brush on my thumb, and you can see it's just leaving a tiny amount of paint. So now I'm going to use that to apply a sort of burny effect to the vernier, you know, trying to give it the sense of hot gases came out of it and stained it and discolored it and maybe left some carbon behind. So we're just very gently just going over, and it's probably quite hard to see in the video, but it is leaving a little bit of brown behind. And I'm also going to go in and kind of add some fake shadows around the base of the rocket engine, just because it will give it a bit more dimensionality, a bit more, you know, shape definition. Okay, nice, we've got a rocket engine. Let's move on. Okay, here's the knee pad, and I'm just starting to do some black lining. So I've mixed up some, again, very thin black paint, and gravity and capillary action are doing most of the work. I'm using the edge of the brush, not the tip of the brush. You know, the edge of the brush is long and straight, so it's much easier for painting lines than the tip. Here I'm putting paint into details like you would with Gunpla markers. I actually think it's a little bit easier with a paintbrush than it is with the markers, to be honest, once you practiced it a little bit. Again, just watch how I'm using the side of the brush, not the tip of the brush. Notice that my hands are locked on the table so they can't shake. Bit shaky because I'm kind of leaning under the tripod. You can also see I'm wearing my head mag in this video because I'm kind of blind without it these days. Alright, I decided to paint one of the panels on the knee pad in white and then yellow. So the white's basically a base coat for the yellow. So thin coats, not expecting full coverage on the first, second, or maybe even the third coat of paint. Just aiming to get an even film of paint with pigment in it over time. Like, what happened? Did I just wander off? Okay, so hairdryer, more white paint, more hairdryer. Okay, now we're going with the yellow. I'm putting a little bit of white in the yellow to make a lemon yellow, partly because I like that colour, but also because that colour will cover a little bit better than just raw yellow. And we're just going to go and fill in that panel with yellow paint. Again, it's very thin and it's probably going to be a couple of coats to get full coverage. Alright, so after a couple of coats it looks like this. So now we're doing, I think here I was touching up the black around the edges of that part, and then I was starting to do a little bit of paint chipping just by adding tiny dots of contrasting paint anywhere I thought there might be paint chips. So I'm just adding some little dots and scratches all over the part. Here, yeah, I'm using a light red, and I'm just kind of dry brushing, kind of edge highlighting along the edge, just trying to imagine where wear and tear might happen on this thing. You know, bearing in mind that it's very, very big. Here I'm adding, well, it was going to be a streak. It was going to be a streak, but it went wrong, so it ended up being a big paint chip. So I ended up actually painting the middle of the paint chip silver to give the idea that maybe the undercoat surface, which is black, has been chipped off right down to the metal. So here I'm just applying more paint chips, just trying to make the thing look like it got used. Okay, so here we're doing the gun, and we're pretty much using the exact same techniques again. I mixed up another shade of grey, and I'm just going to paint the bottom half of the gun with this grey colour. And again, you know, notice that my hands are on the table so they can't shake. I'm basically letting gravity and capillary action do all the work. It doesn't take a lot of skill to paint neatly with a brush if you've got nice brushes and nice paint. So here I'm dry brushing the gun. Look how much paint I've got on my hands. So I'm just dry brushing it. The goal here is just sort of pick out the edges that would get burnished in day-to-day use, and just because honestly because it looks nice. So here I'm painting in some like silver paint chips and stuff like that. Just adding a bit of texture. And here's where I hide that ugly nub on the back of the gun. Like I'm just going to put some highlights on it, and suddenly it looks like it's damaged. Okay, so there are the finished products. So that's using very basic hobby products, no airbrush. Hopefully you like the result, you learned something, you find this useful. Thanks for watching. Bye!